If you want to be among the top 1% of speakers, you need to be precise with your words using frameworks. And I came up with a 4-step framework to hook any audience. Now, this took me nearly 5 years to get this right after studying hundreds of TED Talks, practicing myself, and coaching hundreds of people from around the world. And this framework also helped me grow from 3,000 to 400,000 followers doing speaking lessons on TikTok and Instagram. So let's dive in. So here are the 4 pieces of the 4-part framework. Number 1, the yes/no question. Number 2, segue to the story. Number 3, the key takeaway. And number 4, the call to action. Let's break these down one by one, starting with the yes/no question. Now, the yes/no question is the first thing that you say. It's a simple question that prompts your audience to either emphatically say yes or emphatically say no. Now, this is such an effective hook because people who are more actively engaged and responsive are more attentive than those who are just listening. Every great yes/no question typically has 3 key objectives. The first is I want to make it super easy for my audience to immediately identify with or not identify with what I've said. The second is I want the vast majority of my audience to either say yes or no. I don't want half of my audience to say one thing and half to say another unless that's my intent. And most importantly, I want my audience to ask themselves, why did he ask that question? Now, here's my framework for coming up with potential yes/no questions. Write this down. How many of you blank? ? Now, how you complete that question can fall in one of several possible categories that relate to your audience. Here are 4 of my favorites. It could be a commonly held belief or question. For example, how many of you believe that playing sports for your kids is good for their health? Raise your hands. The second could be a relatable pain. For example, how many of you have ever gotten nervous delivering a speech? Raise your hands. The third could be a commonly taken action. For example, how many of you graduated from a 4-year college? Raise your hands. And the fourth could be a common destination or origin. For example, how many of you came to this conference from the United States? Raise your hands. Now, I think it's important for you to understand your audience profile before you start your presentation. Oftentimes, speaking with either the event organizer or advocates in the room will help you get a sense of what could be the right yes/no question to ask your audience. Now, once you've hooked them, how do you keep them engaged? That's the second part, which is to segue to your story. Remember one of the goals from the yes/no question piece, which was getting your audience to ask themselves, why would he ask that question? Well, the purpose of your story is to answer that question for them. Now, I like to tell a story using the following acronym. It's called SPAT. I'll break it down one by one. S stands for scene, P stands for problem, A stands for aggravation, and T stands for turnaround. Starting with the scene, here are a few great lines that you can use to naturally segue from the yes/no question directly to the story. For example, I can remember a particular time when, or when I was in X time period in my life, or when I had X major life event, or you could even say, imagine. Now, I love all of these openers because they immediately transport your audience to a particular scene. And the great thing is it doesn't need to be more than 3 sentences. For instance, I can remember a time when I was 8 years old and challenged a 10-year-old to a one-on-one basketball game. Now, this seemingly normal recess event that happened in our school's backyard fundamentally changed my life in a way that I would have never expected. Notice what I did there. The first is I'm using specific details to immerse my audience. And second, I add an intriguing preview when I say that it changed my life in a way that I would have never expected. That leaves my audience wondering what happened. Now let's go to P, the problem. The problem is a quick description of the challenge that your hero is facing in the story. So in my example, it could be, as I drove down the lane for a layup, Thad body checked me with his shoulder, leaving a 5-inch gash on my right elbow as I crashed down the pavement. He looked at me and sneered, "Where were you trying to go, you blind bat? I could blind you with dental floss." That was the first time in my life when I became self-aware that I, as an Asian American, looked completely different from all of my white classmates in this Atlanta-based private school. It made me think that maybe I didn't belong. Now, there are many ways that you can tee up the problem, but here are my 2 guidelines. First, I like to give a detail or a quote from the scene. And second, I like to describe the impact. Why was this such a big problem for the hero of the story? Now, the next part is A for aggravate. Aggravate is our way of making the problem hurt for your reader to hear. This makes them feel much more emotionally attached to your hero and stay around for that eventual turnaround moment. For example, in my story, here's what I'd say. The next day, my mother called me to get ready for school. Preston, it's already 7:30. We're gonna be late. I remember locking the door, burying my head under the bed sheets, and drawing all over my arms with white crayons. I didn't want anyone to see me, and this feeling stayed with me for almost a decade. Here, I'm showing why the problem hurts so much, and here are a couple guidelines. Number 1, emotionally, why was this so painful for your hero? Number 2, what was the negative outcome by not solving this problem? Why was the outcome so severe? And number 3, how long did the problem hurt your hero? And finally, T for turnaround. Turnaround is a description of how your hero overcame the problem. For example, in my story, I might say, it wasn't until I was 18 years old when I began coaching younger kids how to play table tennis and tutoring high school students on their SATs when things began to change for me. There was nothing more satisfying than seeing my students go from point A to point B and beaming ear to ear because I was so proud of the progress they made. Now, I did this for white people, black people, Hispanic people, Asian people. It didn't matter what their race was, and it didn't matter what my race was. These experiences gave me my purpose, which is to help people grow through coaching. It helped me turn around those dark inward thoughts of things that I couldn't control to outward thoughts of things that I could. And that's what motivated me today to speak to you now as an impromptu speaking coach. One takeaway I have for you is I often want my turnaround to lead to the specific present day. For example, what led me to speak in front of you today. Part 3 of this 4-part framework is the takeaway. The takeaway is all about relevancy for your audience. My goal is to make it super clear for my audience exactly what benefit they'll get from this story. For example, in my case, you probably have your own mental block due to a traumatic past that's preventing you from being your best self. And I know that for me, reframing my struggle as my purpose helped me love myself again. And I'd love for you to do the same. And part 4 is the call to action. The call to action is a request for your audience to do one thing after your talk. And the simpler, the better. The CTA should answer the question, how can I apply that takeaway? And here's my example. So the next time you have 5 minutes, I'd encourage you to fill out a worksheet called your 5 whats and 5 whys. Write down one sentence that describes what you want in life and a sentence next to it that describes why you want that thing in life. And then rank your top 5 whats and whys in priority order. This can apply to your personal goals, your professional goals, or both. And if you'd like a sample template, you can check the link in the description below. You likely won't get this exactly right the first time around, so iterate on it with your friends, your family, your colleagues, those who know you well, to make sure that your whats and whys are reflecting who you really are. And once you're done with this, it will focus you on what truly matters, not the traumas that could be preventing you from being your best self. So in order to nail your presentation, it's all about hooking them, keeping them engaged with the story, and making sure that they take action after you finish your talk. Now, to be clear, there's no one right way of doing this, but I can tell you for a fact this 4-part intro has done me wonders throughout my career. I hope that helps. Thanks so much.